this is actually taken from the very beginning of the book of Leviticus, Vayikra, the first verses, and it says, Vayikra el Moshe, Vaydeber Adonai elav. So Yud He Vav He, this specific God of Israel, called to Moses and spoke to him. And then we're going to see a little bit of what he says. Who wants to take a shot at just commenting on these first verses? I don't know. Nick, do you want to just explain why we start with ve? Why do we start with and in this Leviticus book? Or arguably, at least, that's one interpretation. And why then are we going to jump into talking about animals and sacrifices and offerings? Why is this going to be a central focus of maybe the first part, at least, of Leviticus?
Yeah, that's a great question, Shai. So it starts with a vav, that first letter that you see, Vayikra, and God called El Moshe to Moses. So why begin the book like this? It all has to do with what comes immediately before this in the book of Exodus, and this is a plug for reading the whole Torah as a unit, and knowing the context even of the biblical books in their chronology. So right before this, in Exodus chapter 40, Moses has finally put the finishing touches on the tabernacle that God tells he and the Israelites to build in the wilderness. And the whole point of this tabernacle is for God to come down and commune, to have fellowship with God's people. But the issue is, though, right at the end of Exodus, is that Moses tries to get into the tent of meeting, into the tabernacle, and he can't get in. The glory of the Lord, the cloud of the Lord is in there, and he can't make his way in there. And that's just kind of how Exodus ends, which is really funny because he's up on Mount Sinai, as everybody knows, and he enters into the cloud of the Lord there. So why can't he get into the tabernacle once the Lord, as it were, comes down to earth and God's glory fills the tabernacle? Well, that is the question that Leviticus is going to answer for us. How is it that human beings who are not holy like God can commune with God on God's earth, in God's creation? And in that way, Leviticus is going to answer that glaring question for us that Exodus kind of tees up in the last chapter.
That is a fascinating perspective. So again, I would say that many people, when they look at Leviticus, they think it's maybe outdated or inaccessible or boring or just bloody and, very inappropriate for today. But you're saying what the book is actually about is how a human can draw near to the deity. And actually that idea of drawing near is in Hebrew related to the idea of sacrifice. We'll probably hear about that. Did you want to comment on
That's
that,
right.
Nick?
Yeah, no, I just want to affirm everything that you've said. And I think that Leviticus gets a bit of a bad rap in modernity and in congregations, whether they're Jewish or Christian. I was just teaching at a synagogue recently, and I've taught at churches on Leviticus several times, and I think both groups are kind of like, I'm not so sure what to do with Leviticus, or I don't know that I like this animal sacrifice idea, or all these rules and all these things, and where's God in all of this? Well, the truth is that all the rules and all the things are specifically for relationship with God. So of all the texts in the Torah, Leviticus, I feel like, is almost like the heart of God, because the whole point of this is to relate with God, that God will be a God to God's people, and the people will relate to God. So it's a highly relational book, Leviticus, even though it may not seem like that on the surface.
Thank you for that. Yeah,
Yeah,
and here,
I was going to say the question and the theme of our topic that we're talking about is we need sacrifices, right? And so to me, the obvious answer is, well, apparently God, because here it is in the very beginning of Leviticus. He says that, if a person comes and they bring a korban, okay, a sacrifice, an offering. I mean, there's so many different ways of translating korban, but really, those of us who know, the word korban in Hebrew is related to verb karav, which means to draw near. So, in fact, Hebrew plays with this language, okay? It's right there in the text. It says, when the person comes near, okay, and here's that word, he will bring an offering, which comes from the word to come near, right? And this whole language right here in the end of the verse, in English, it's not obvious. But in Hebrew, it keeps talking about drawing near to God through the offering.
It's
Korban offerings are all about relationships. And to me, the beauty of Book of Leviticus, because it's all about relationships. And, a while ago, I was kind of stricken by this thought that anywhere in the Bible, there's many places where God always talks about having a relationship with human beings. But here we have such instructive language that tells us how. And yes, we are living in the modern world outside of this realm of the sacrifices. Most of us have never, ever seen a sacrifice in our life, okay? I keep wanting to go to spend some time with the Samaritans to see how they do the Pesach sacrifice, because they're the only ancient community from this Israelite tradition that still perform sacrifices. And so, me just being exposed to my culture is one thing, but to be able to see that firsthand, I personally think that would actually change so much for me. But yes, we're modern people. We're not surrounded by the blood and the guts and all these things. And in fact, most of those things kind of gross us out. So yeah, we get to the book of Leviticus and we don't quite connect. But I think it's a challenge to all of us to delve deep into these words and realize that even though we today, thousands of years, 3,000 years from the time these words are given, we're sitting here kind of judging from our perspective of culture. Yet Hashem, God, he just said, this is what I want. This is how I want you to relate to me. And we may not be able to relate to him today this way, but there's a deep lessons that we can learn from why did he want us to relate to him that way? What does it convey? What does it tell us about God? And what does it tell us about us? Why would we need that sort of a relationship?
Well, that is a big question, of course. And I think there are various answers that people have given to that. We'll probably look at that. I mean, why animal sacrifice? And does it just come from the ancient background and the way that ancient peoples were thinking? Or is it somehow more relevant, not just culturally relevant? And if so, why don't Jews and Christians and others who are followers of the Bible, why don't they do it today? This is a very intriguing question, especially since it seems to be so clearly commanded, as you said. I just want to point out one thing based on what you were saying about the language. So at the very end, it says, Takrivu et korbanchem. So you were saying the connection is obvious in the biblical Hebrew, but not in English. And I've taken the translation of Robert Alter, who attempts to make these connections clear in English translation. Actually, that's one of his big... one of the big things he focuses on in his writing and in his translation is trying to make these connections that are all throughout the Hebrew text appear to the English reader. But even in this case, even he wasn't able to do it, really. You see, what he says is, if you bring forward to Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, to the God of Israel, right, the Creator, an offering, you shall bring forward your offering. So you don't see the connection, even in his translation. But in Hebrew, it's very closely related.
The verse, you could see that phrase, or there's a ki akriv mecham korban, right there. That's your first underline there.
Yeah. So it repeats twice this. I don't know if it's an internal accusative or cognate accusative or what it's called exactly, but it's this repetition of the root for emphasis and for the connection, and so you miss that entirely. So, I mean, I guess we could say in a somewhat literal translation that will miss other aspects of the text. You could say something like, when you drawing near.
You draw near by offering an offering.
You could either say when you offer an offering, which doesn't help a lot, or you can say when you bring near a bringing near or a drawing near or something like that. It's interesting that we missed this. Nick, I know you're itching to get in here.
No, I'm glad not to have to, because I was trying to come up with the same thing, and I honestly couldn't do it.
It doesn't want to translate.
You can't. That's right. You can't. I don't know how you would nounicize to bring forward or to bring near.
But okay, let's confront this dinosaur in the glass cage head on, if you will. Why is there a picture of a dinosaur in a glass cage there? Well, as Mary Douglas wrote, Leviticus is usually put into a kind of glass cabinet. It can be looked at, respected, and wondered at, but the real heart of the religion is presumed to be found in other parts of the Bible, especially Genesis, Exodus, and Deuteronomy, and the writings of the psalmists and the prophets. The tradition does Leviticus wrong. Now, Mary Douglas was a very well-known anthropologist and scholar. She looked at questions of purity and ritual in many cultures and then applied this knowledge to trying to understand the Torah, essentially. And she wrote some famous books, one of them being Leviticus as Literature, which kind of opens with this statement, I think. So what do you think, maybe I can ask Pinchas first, what do you think about this idea that most people do have, that the real heart of the religion is elsewhere? I mean, the stories, the psalms with the poetry, the prophetic words. You are already starting to give an opposing answer by talking about relationship, but you know, the fact is, a lot of Leviticus will be pretty dry reading, and it's often referred to as a kind of priestly manual. Mm-hmm. So how do you make that come alive in the same way as stories and prophecy and songs that we find elsewhere?
Well, first of all, I agree with Mary Douglas. I find her work fascinating. Purity and Danger is the book that I have combed through quite a few times, because that's a topic that's been interesting to me throughout various parts of just my own academic study. And so I keep going to it. And not being an anthropologist, I appreciate her perspective, because she doesn't just look at, Jewish culture. She looks at many different world cultures, and she sees these trends and these threads that are running through many different cultures, how they treat purity, how they treat impurity. So there are some things that we are not that different in. But then and she looks at the Hebrew culture and says, well, these people have some really unusual notions. And of course, that's where she gets into the Bible and she starts reading those passages. And she has her own little interesting twist on it, which I think is unique of her anthropological perspective. My perspective is a bit more theological, I guess, when I come to these places. But I do agree with her. It is the heart of the religion. Why? And I'll give a simple answer. There is nowhere in the Bible that you are being prescribed how to worship God, except in Leviticus. In Leviticus, this is it. Like, God gives commandments. This is how you come to me. When you come to me, this is the manner in which you come. This is how often you come. When you come, this is what you bring along. I mean, this is the manual for relationship. Yes, it is a manual for priests, but that's if we relegate the relationship out of the human realm and just say, okay, these guys have a relationship with God on our behalf. And then whatever they do kind of counts to us, and we just kind of merit whatever the sacrifices they bring in. But for Israel, if we think about Bamidbar, in the wilderness experience, they're stationed and their tents literally surrounding the Mishkan. They're built in this circular way as they camp, and God is right in the midst of them. And this pillar of fire is shooting up right there, and the cloud and smoke, it's all right there. They're constantly in God's presence. They're cognizant of it all the time. We read these stories, right? And we go to the stories of Nadav and Avihu, and they drop dead. And we're like, oh, it's weird to us. But this is their reality. God says, this is how you come to me. These are the terms of our engagement. You don't just show up empty-handed. You don't just show up willy-nilly. Yes, you have to be pure. Yes, you have to cleanse yourself. Yes, you have to put on nice clothes to show up to me. Why? Because I am not like your buddy over there sitting across from that tent. I am different. I'm holy. And I think it teaches us about God's character more than anything else. I mean, if you really want to understand the holiness of God, just read through the list of sacrifices. And then you start realizing, wow, we must be that separate from God. He sees so much wrong with us in so many ways. Yet in the midst of it, there's so much mercy because he's willing to have a relationship with us. He says, I am putting myself in your midst. But there are some rules of engagement. You can't just come to me any way you wish. There's a procedure, there's process, because I am holy, I'm different, I am the creator of everything you see, and the very breath you have is because I made it so. So if you don't show me the recognition, if you don't give me that respect, that honor, if you just ignore everything of how I want things to be, then this relationship is not going to work. And we have examples, of course, of that not working as well. So to me, Leviticus teaches so much about God, but it really is all about relationship. It is an awesome idea that the creator of the universe, who made this world in 6 days, okay, is willing to have a closeness, okay? We're talking about coming close to God, like Korban, right? Drawing near. He's willing to have nearness with his people, but then he puts some terms on the table. And that's understood. You know, maybe it's understood even in some of our cultures today. We just don't show up. Like if I wanted to walk into White House today, guess what? Not going to happen. I'm just going to drive my car, park it, on Pennsylvania Avenue and just walk right in. No, it's not going to happen. I'm going to have to be cleared. They're going to have to run my fingerprints. All of the Secret Service is going to have to know who I am and know everything about me before I even get anywhere near that place. And so if this is how we are with places like White House, I mean, think about it. You're coming in touch with the creator of the universe. And so, yes, to me, this is the heart of religion. I agree with Mary Douglas because it's hard for us to make sense of it because the world that we live in is so different. And we don't think of it that way. And there's been theological paradigms that have replaced that for us. But I really do think that is the heart of the matter. And studying it is totally worthwhile because in the midst of all these endless rules, there are principles which, once we understand them, it will only make us appreciate who our God is much more.
Thank you for that, Pinchas. And I think one of Mary Douglas's main contributions to what you were saying has to do with how she looks at, in Leviticus especially, the rules concerning things like blood and sex and death and dirt, the things that do separate humans from the divine, that make us different from the divine, that are more part of our animal nature, if you will. And so how she explains those rituals, bringing a broader human perspective to bear.
What Bible do you read? And how do you know it's the right one?
There's only one version of the Bible, right?
It might surprise you to learn that Bible translations led to many versions of Holy Scripture. Long ago, translators interpreted the Hebrew Bible, ensuring it would be enjoyed in many languages. But when they encountered Hebrew words they didn't understand, translators relied on their individual cultural context and used different words with different meanings unrelated to the original ones. This led to Bible versions that lacked the full, beautiful, original explanations becoming part of our history. That's why when you join our online classes, you'll get back to the source of the original Hebrew Bible to uncover hidden meanings.
Get back to the source. Join our online course today, where the treasures of the authentic Bible await you.
Click on the link and register to start your biblical experience.